Long before history learned to write itself, before words carried meanings and meanings carried weight, there were only gestures, warmth and silence. In a world of ice and hunger, love was not a luxury. It was survival disguised as tenderness. Amid the wild valleys and frostbitten ridges lived Kor, a solitary hunter with a quiet strength, whose eyes reflected the patience of the earth. His days were carved from stone, and his nights from wind. He hunted not for pleasure but for need, and in his heart there was an emptiness older than language, a hollow where something unnamed was waiting to be found. One evening, as the horizon burned with the dying sun, Kor followed the faint trail of smoke curling from a cave unknown to him. There, by a fire no larger than a child's heartbeat, sat Lira, her hair tangled with ash and moonlight, her hands stained with the roots of gathered herbs. She looked at him not with fear, but with the stillness of someone who had already accepted the world. In that moment, the age of stone softened. The first fire of affection flickered, unnoticed by history, but eternal in the memory of a human soul. Kor and Lira shared no words, only small exchanges of existence. He would bring her meat from his hunts. She would share her herbs and fruit in return. They began to speak through gestures, a hand over the heart for gratitude, a nod for safety, a glance for trust. In that silent rhythm, they built something no tribe or tool had yet crafted, intimacy. When storms swept through their valley, they would huddle beside the fire, her head resting against his chest as his heartbeat steadied the world. In those moments, they did not know they were inventing the oldest language, the language of closeness. Their laughter echoed against cave walls, their breath intertwined with smoke and wind, and their hearts learned to beat in unison. Outside, the beasts roared and the cold howled, but inside, a new kind of warmth was born, a warmth that came not from fire, but from two souls daring to exist as one. One evening, under a bruised sky painted with the last shades of twilight, Kor carved something into the wall of their cave. It was not an animal or a hunt scene, as others would have done. It was two simple figures, side by side, their hands joined. Lira watched him, her eyes gleaming with a quiet understanding. She touched the carving, then touched his face, and for the first time in their world, a promise was made, unspoken but unbreakable. It was a promise that no winter could erase and no death could silence. Together, they hunted, they gathered, and when the nights grew longer, they held each other tighter, guarding their fragile warmth against the universe's indifference they had no notion of forever. Yet somehow, they lived it every day. Then came the great winter, a season so cruel it silenced rivers and buried forests beneath walls of white. Food vanished. Even the skies seemed frozen. Kor's hunts grew longer and emptier. Lyra's herbs no longer grew.
Warmth,
they wrapped themselves in furs,
for the
surviving
snow
on scraps
to
and hope.
melt.
The cave that once echoed with laughter
Protect
now
us
hummed with
until
quiet
the
prayers.
sun
Kor's body weakened, but his will burned bright. He would not let her die. One morning, he left before dawn, carrying a spear into the endless snow. Days passed, the fire dimmed. Lira waited, whispering his name into the void. On the third night, he returned, skin blue with cold, hands trembling, clutching a single piece of meat. For 3 days, Lira kept the fire alive, feeding it with everything they had, their spears, their mats, even her hair. She tended to Kor's still body, singing softly in a voice cracked by grief and frost. She refused to leave him. As her strength faded, she lay beside him, her hand finding his. Together, they became still. Two figures joined in silence. The cave's last flame flickered once and went out, but something invisible remained, the warmth of devotion that even death could not freeze. When the snows thawed months later, hunters from another valley found their remains, still clasping hands, surrounded by faint carvings of two figures beneath the sun. They did not understand what they saw, yet they felt it. The air was heavy with a beauty beyond words. Years passed, then centuries and millennia. The valley changed. Forests rose where ice had been. But inside that cave, the carvings endured. The first art love, made not for gods or power, but for each other. When early humans later stumbled upon it, they touched the figures with awe. They, too, began to carve hearts, draw pairs, hold hands, and share warmth beside fires. Unknowingly, every gesture of affection that followed, every kiss, every embrace, every tear shed in longing, carried a trace of Kor and Lira's ancient promise. They had not only loved each other, they had taught the species how to love. Over ages, their story turned to myth. Some said the gods had sculpted them as an example. Others whispered they became stars, 2 points of light that always shone side by side, guiding lost wanderers home. But in truth, their love needed no gods, no heavens. It was written in something deeper than belief, in bone, in breath, in the memory of humanity itself. Each time a heart chose another, each time someone stayed beside the dying fire, their spirits lived again. Love had begun not in palaces or poetry, but in that cold cave, between two souls who had nothing and gave everything. Now, thousands of years later, when people speak of love, they imagine flowers, music, or words. But the truest love remains the oldest kind, silent, raw, and brave. The kind that asks for nothing but to exist beside another. The kind that outlives storms and seasons. In the breath between heartbeats, when we hold someone close without speaking, we return, for a moment, to that cave, to that fire, to Kor and Lira. Their bodies turned to dust long ago, but their story burns in every heart that dares to love against the cold. And that is why, in all of history, no love has ever been more romantic than theirs, because it was not written on paper, but carved into time itself. Long after Kor and Lira's fire had turned to ash, the cave remained alive with silence. The wind that once whispered through its mouth carried something unseen, a vibration, a pulse that belonged not to air but to memory. Animals passed by and paused without reason, sensing the tenderness trapped in the stone. Seasons rose and fell like tides of time, and new tribes came, unknowing, to shelter in the same cave. They found the carvings, 2 shapes side by side, hands entwined, surrounded by faded drawings of flame and sun. None could explain who had made them, but every heart that saw them softened. A mother held her child closer. A man lingered by the fire longer. It was as though something sacred, older than gods, had settled in the bones of that mountain. The echo of 2 who had once dared to love completely in a world that knew no mercy. The cave became known as the place of warmth, though no one knew why. The memory of Kor and Lira had outlived their names. Among the tribes that followed, one learned to tell the story in symbols. Each winter, when the frost had turned, they would carve 2 figures into fresh rock and light fires between them, believing it would protect them from the cold. They said the spirits of the joined ones would return to guard their hearts through the night. Young lovers would touch the carvings before leaving for the hunt, whispering silent vows to return. Slowly, this ritual spread from valley to valley, a quiet religion without gods, born from an act of love. Around those flames, humans discovered something divine that no spear or stone could give. Belonging, in a world ruled by hunger and death, the idea of love became a weapon of hope. Every spark struck from flint carried a memory of that first fire in the cave. Without knowing it, humanity was building its first temple, not of stone, but a heart. Many ages later, when speech began to take shape, stories found voices. The myth of the joined ones became song. Around campfires, the elders would chant of 2 souls who held each other against the ice and taught the world warmth. The children would listen with wide eyes, and in their dreams, they saw Kor's silhouette against snow, and Lira's face lit by a trembling flame. As language grew, so did the poetry of their bond. Tribes far apart began to share the tale in different tongues, yet always with the same ending. That love was the only fire that could not die. Even as humanity grew restless and divided, that old story lingered, humbling kings and comforting wanderers. It became a truth carried in sound, that every song of love, no matter the age, was simply a retelling of 2 figures in a cave thousands of winters ago. Time marched on, and the cave was buried under centuries of change. The ice melted, forests swallowed mountains, and rivers drew new paths. But deep within the earth, under layers of forgotten worlds, the carvings endured. When the first farmers tilled the soil, when bronze replaced stone, when villages became kingdoms, something unseen guided hands to paint lovers on pottery. carve them on temple walls, and speak of soulmates written in the stars. They did not know Kor or Lira's names, yet they felt their truth. Sculptors chiseled figures embracing. Poets wrote of eternal bonds, and even priests began to call love divine. The story of the caveman lovers had dissolved into human instinct. Wherever there was art, there was their ghost. Gentle, eternal, unbroken. They were not remembered as people, but as the essence of love itself. Thousands of years later, when explorers wandered through an ancient forest, they found the cave once more. Its walls were cracked, its floor silent. Yet when light touched the carvings, the air shimmered faintly, as though the fire had never gone out. The explorers felt something they could not name, a warmth that did not belong to the torches they carried. One of them, a woman, brushed her fingers against the carved hands of Kor and Lira. She smiled, not knowing why, and whispered to no one. They were in love. That night, she wrote in her journal, before language, before art, before gods, there was this. She did not realize she had written humanity's oldest truth again. Her words would one day inspire paintings, films, and poems, all unknowingly born from that same cave, that same fire, that same love. Love evolved, but its pulse remained ancient. Cities rose, empires fell, technology replaced the stars, yet people still reached for each other in the dark. Every time two hands touched, the world remembered Kor and Lira. Lovers still faced winters of their own, not of snow, but of loneliness, fear, and time, and yet they fought to keep the fire alive. The story had become invisible, but it lived in gestures, in a glance that lingered too long, in a tear wiped away, in the quiet peace of sleeping beside someone you trust. The same rhythm of heartbeats that once echoed in that cave now beat beneath skyscrapers and neon skies. Love had survived every extinction, every storm. It was the only thing time could not bury, because it had never belonged to time. It was born before history, and it would outlast it. And so, when people today say true love never dies, they speak unknowingly of Kor and Lira. Their bones may be dust, their cave lost beneath forests and stone, but their fire burns in every human heart that dares to love despite the cold. They were the first to show that love is not found in comfort or words, but in staying when everything else fades. Their story began with two figures in the dark, but ends with us, all of us, carrying their flame through the endless winter of time. For as long as someone chooses warmth over fear, tenderness over silence, or another heartbeat over solitude, their love lives on. And that is why, though centuries have passed, the most romantic love in history still belongs to the caveman, and to the woman who taught him that even in the coldest world, the heart remembers how to burn,